Okay, great. So what we're going to discuss today is Plato, mostly. I know the initial title of the lecture is Queering Plato and Freud, and we're going to talk about Freud as well. And we will talk about him every next lecture, except maybe for last one, when we'll hopefully stop talking about him, defeat him. But today we will use Freud, we'll talk about Freud, but use him mostly as an enemy. So without queering him, just keep him a bit the way he's normally perceived, and keep him in this commonsensical, in his commonsensical perception, because we needed to queer Plato. So what we're going to do, we're going to queer Plato, but through this also, in a way, we're going to queer commonsensical Freud as well today. So queering Plato. And for this lecture until the last lecture, the definition of queering is to preserve a simple definition, like looking at something in a weird perspective, right? Not a normal, not a perspective that we got used to. We change our point of view, see it in a different light. So query. And the other important goal, challenge for my lectures, and what I want to do, maybe some part of my life as well, is to challenge the central place of sexuality, the way it is perceived still. And this is what Foucault was talking about in his History of Sexuality, that most of you are familiar with. So Foucault trying to doubt, why are we talking about sexuality so much? Why do we perceive sexuality as something that defines us, some central features through which we're supposed to define ourselves? Where we see our secrets, something that holds it, we presuppose, holds it in a darkness. And this still happening today. This is why you have this class. This is called Gender, Sexuality, and Biopolitics. So this sexuality is still seen as a main feature of who we are, right? Something through the lens of what we trying to define ourselves. We try to understand ourselves. Like, it's a very big deal. And this is something that still we don't doubt. This self-perspective, reflection, the lens of self-reflection that we don't doubt enough. Something is which is obvious for us. And philosophy, according to Foucault, one of the definition is to doubt the obvious, to doubt some obvious perspective that we got used to, and maybe try to see it in a different light, at least see it as not obvious, which might coincide in this way with the word queering. And so this is the main challenge of a class, not of the class, but of the final part of the class, maybe for me, not for you. But anyway, it's useful to try to see it in a different perspective. So to see sexuality, to learn about sexuality, but not as a central one, like trying to doubt why we concentrating on it as a central, not during this class, but in our lives, in our culture, and trying to figure out some other perspective, maybe alternative perspective. And the last class is very important in this in such way, because we're going to talk about, except for summary of the whole class, we're going to talk about queer as such and asexuality as such. The problem with asexuality is that even though it's something we're trying to emancipate recently and starting to talk about asexuality, like those people who are maybe don't fall, at least by the way they're named, who don't fall into this definition through through the lens of sexuality, but the problem is that because there is the word sexuality in asexual people, in the very name, it still preserves the central place of sexuality. So there is no escape from this this way of defining ourselves. And but the main thing that is to try to see it as a subject to doubt, as subject to discuss, not something which is self-evident, because generally in our common sense still today it's perceived as something central. Not only sexuality as a way, as a sexuality as something we define our longing to others, as sexual orientation, but sex as well, which is which we might call gender, or we might substitute with the word gender, but it doesn't actually does a lot substituting it with gender. So it still preserves the initial, at the basis, what it deviates, it still preserves initial understanding of two sexes and initial structure, how they were perceived. So male and female, with all the consequences of their initial definition. No matter how more genders we add, we still preserve this basis at the bottom of how we define ourselves, and that might be a problem, and it is a problem. So we will try to queer all that and maybe try to come up with some alternative definition of who we are and what connects us. So this is Freud. Today he's our enemy, but he's also going to be from time to time our friend. According to Freud, he saw Plato as his forerunner. So he actually thought that the way he perceived, the way he talks about love, the way he talks about human being, it was actually the Plato concept, or extended concept of Plato, Eros. He said, because there was a criticism raised against psychoanalysis, he claimed that whoever criticizes psychoanalysis, see it from this superior point of view, should consider that sexuality in psychoanalysis, according to Freud, is just the same enlarged sexuality of Eros, concept of Eros, of divine Plato, the way he calls him here. So Freud himself recognized that what he does, what he develops, is a Plato concept of Eros, concept of sexuality. So, and it's not only for Freud himself, but my claim is, and not only my claim, is that the way we perceive sexuality today is largely defined by Freud. So whatever we start to think about ourselves, it's for the most part still Freud concept. The way we think about sexuality, the way we perceive what love is, and the role that sexuality played in love relationship or in our lives, it's still on the level of intuitive thinking. It coincides largely with Freud. So we are Freud, right, to great extent in our perception of who we are, even though we criticizing him, even though he was criticized a lot, but he's still deeply in our minds, which is not bad, because there are two minimum Freuds: bad Freud, the one who preserves this basic idea of sexuality, of division on two sexes, and keeps the traditional perception of sexuality just in its extended version. And also there is a good Freud, and for this to compensate on the way we're going to perceive Freud today, you have two readings for this week. Is the one Stella Stanford deals with, compares Freud and Plato understanding of sexuality, and she presents not only bad Freud, but also good one, at least the better one than the bad one. And Alianka Zupancic perspective on what is sexuality, so you can see how sexuality in psychoanalysis is perceived today. It's a chapter from the book that was published a couple of years ago. So it's brand new perception of sexuality within Freudian and Lacanian psychoanalysis, where Freud is presented more or less as our friend, and this queer perspective, or weird perspective, the perspective that deviates from normal intuitive perspective. So we are Freud, the way we perceive sexuality ourselves and Plato is largely a Freudian perspective, and this Freudian perspective is something we're going to fight today. So it's my claim is, and not only my claim, but Stella Stanford, for example, too, is that we perceive Plato in Freudian perspective. So once we start to read, Freud in our mind is something that switches on, and his lens is a lens for us to perceive him. And here the most important maybe concept is concept of sublimation for us. Does anyone know what is sublimation in Freud? Can someone define it?
It is, if I'm not mistaken, it's kind of when you have some desires and you have no opportunity to realize, to make them true, and you try to sublimate, so to make them true in other ways, using other tools, ways, or something else.
Yeah, thank you. It's, if you can't realize them, it's more like repression, but yeah, sublimation is too. So transformation of desire, of initial desire into something else. But what are we sublimating, and into what? What is the initial point, and what is the later point after the sublimation? Anyone? Thank you, Olga.
I can say.
Okay.
We can sublimate to work, for example, to study, or some other physical things, running, sport, for example.
Yeah, but what are those desires that we are sublimating?
Well, according to Freud, these are Eros, sexual drive, and Thanatos, death drive.
Yeah, thank you. This was too good because we're not talking about death drive here, because talking about death drive is a really queer Freud. So the basic one, without not talking about death drive, love to talk about death drive, but not today. So yeah, initials, the normal the normal explanation of what is sublimation, it presupposes the transformation of sexual drive, those libidinal drives, into socially useful achievements like art and cultural intellectual pursuit. So the basic understanding of sublimation, Freudian understanding, but really simplified. So simplified to the level that is intuitive, the way Freud is perceived within common sense, and the way we still largely perceive ourselves. Maybe you don't, I hope you don't, but still there is this impression that first we have sexual, especially when we talk about men, right? Men desire. First, there is this sexual drive, and then it gets to throughout the cultural activity and the way culture is built itself, because it's inappropriate, something is wrong with it, doesn't coincide with our understanding how the culture is supposed to function, or it perceived within a culture as inappropriate, we're trying to sublimate it, that is, transform it into more appropriate pursuits. So the basic here for Freud, it's true, maybe contemporary psychoanalysis see sexuality in Freudian theory in a more complicated way, but we still, Freud still preserves this basic initial definition, intuitive for us today, of sexuality, like longing for sexual intercourse and sublimating it into something else. And now we'll come to Plato. So in Plato, Plato's Symposium is the main work for us today. I know most of you read it because you had it on great books. But if you didn't, it's good as well. We only need to deal today with this ladder of love that the time I present, and I will read it during lecture, most of the pieces, and discuss them. Anyway, so in Plato's Symposium, one of the main Plato's dialogue, which is discussed when the love is the theme of love is discussed in this dialogue. We have Diotima, woman prophetess, who Socrates recalls her teaching. Teaching which got named Ladder of Love. So he presented to Socrates, teaching him about love, about the space of eroticism in this image of ladder of love. And I want you to watch the couple of minutes BBC movie. It presents the Ladder of Love. We will discuss it a lot today, just to give you, first, there are pictures in there, and second, just to show you the common, maybe today, understanding how we perceive Plato. So let us watch it. Let me know if you can hear it.
In Plato,
can you?
Yes.
Dialogue, the Symposium, Socrates recalls Diotima's teaching that the desire for one beautiful man's body is just the first rung on a ladder that leads up to the appreciation of the form of beauty, and so is merely a means to the higher end of appreciating the abstract idea. This is Diotima's teaching. To learn about beauty, first recognize the physical beauty of your desired lover. Then, if you're rational, you'll appreciate not just the individual loved one's beauty, but also the physical beauty of others, too. It would be absurd only to see beauty in one individual, since bodies are so similar. From this, the next step up the ladder is to see the beauty that lies beyond appearances, the beauty in wisdom and knowledge, the beauty of beautiful minds, even if they happen to dwell in bodies which aren't particularly beautiful. The last step is to come to recognize the form of beauty itself, the abstract, pure, general notion of beauty. This form of beauty also carries with it moral qualities of goodness. So if you take the first step of falling for the body of a beautiful youth, Diotima thinks you can progress from this to a more cerebral appreciation of universal beauty. Lust is on the bottom rung of the ladder, and morality at the top, if you're prepared to make the ascent.
Yay. So this is the BBC understanding of Ladder of Love, which actually present the common understanding of Ladder of Love. And my question here would be, considering this understanding, is Plato Ladder of Love coincide with the sublimation theory? The way I presented it without death drive yet. So is it easier? Do we really see it from this perspective? And is it something that we recognize that on the bottom, on the first stage, there is carnal desire, and then it kind of gets transformed. So it's desire for beautiful body, and then it gets transformed into something else. Is this the way we really perceive it? Can we say that Plato, that Freud was correct, claiming that that his forerunner is Plato? Was the question. Yes, Vladislav, and then Alina.
Maybe the main difference here is that following the logic of Plato, you are leaving these first stages of lust while approaching to the beauty as an abstract idea, but in Freudian terms, you are never able to lose these passions, although you can sublime them, but they're always with you.
Thank you. Okay, who else raised the hand?
Me?
Yeah, okay.
Well, now that when you explained, I could sort of see the similarity that this carnal desire could be the first step to the higher ground, or like just the first step, but I think it's really different in the sense that in Freud's sublimation theory, desire is the most essential thing, like it's the main passion, it's the main power. And in Plato's, it's just a first step that will lead you to a higher ground. So it doesn't have the same urgency or necessity or, again, power as it holds in Freud's.
Yeah, thank you. Correct. So both are correct. In a way, because there are people, theorists are actually arguing either in Freud theory what is sublimated is preserved, like if you sublimate sexual drive into more culturally appropriate behavior activities, the question is whether whether the fact that it's still sexual is preserved. And some theorists claim that it is preserved, and that's the problem. Why are they still sexual if they are now cultural? And some claim that they are not, for example, sexual at the beginning already, even though they're called sexual. So it's that complicated. And so yeah, we can find difference here between already here this level of understanding. The basic discussion is that there are differences, but still maybe on the level of power of those urges of the desire. But we still stay here within the perspective that first initially that there are some carnal desires, sexual desires, and then they are transformed. Yeah, this desire that is transformed into something else, into something more sublime. And so let us read the whole thing of Diotima, not the whole thing, but the most of Diotima, the way she presents the ladder of love. So she claims, it's important. So he who is to move correctly in this matter must begin while young to go to beautiful bodies. So we have first stage, go to beautiful bodies. Then first of all, he must love one body. No, that's the first stage. So love to one body, to desire one body, and there generate beautiful speeches. Then he must realize that the beauty that is in any body whatsoever is related to that in another body. So, and with this realization, he must be the lover of all beautiful bodies, and in contempt liken his erotic intensity for only one body in the belief that it is pretty. After this, he must believe that the beauty is in soul is more honorable than that in the body. So next stage, beauty of soul. And so that even if someone who is decent in his soul has only a slight youthful charm, the lover must be content with it and love and cherish him, and engender and seek such speeches to be as will make the young better. And after this pursuit, he must lead the beloved on the sciences, onto the sciences, so that he himself, the lover, may see the beauty of sciences, and in looking at the beautiful, which is now so vast, no longer be content, like a lackey with beauty in one, of a boy, of some human being, or of one partis, nor be sorry for a slave and pretty calculator, but with a permanent truth turn to vast open sea of beautiful, behold it and give birth in ungrudging philosophy to many beautiful and magnificent speeches and thoughts. So here, after we were presented this BBC movie, I think it's recent one, it doesn't matter. And after we read Diotima in this way, right? After we were presented the Freud's concept of sublimation, this shows us that within this within Diotima presentation, what is crucial for us, the way we perceive it, is those words that are bold here. So we can claim that ladder of love consists of 4, more or less, the whole continuum of eroticism that Diotima presents. From this perspective, it consists of, first we start at the bottom with the sexual longing for a beautiful boy. So one body of a boy, this desire starts. Then we go up, we lift it to the love of all beautiful bodies, it's still bodies. Then we go up to the love for beauty of souls, from the love for body. And then we go to love of wisdom as such, and to philosophy. And this is on the left is a picture of Diotima. It's a statue of Diotima that presumably is a statue of Diotima. It's without head, the way it was found, and there's people still arguing if it was a true character or invented character. And she's presented here without head because this understanding is kind of coincide with this with her presentation here. It's like really you cut the main thing, or at least you might see this presentation as deprived of something that is crucial, of something that is important, or at least some alternative perspective on what is a ladder of love. So perceiving Plato within such understood Freudian perception, this is what we get. Those are stages. We go from the love to beautiful body, desire, then to all bodies, then to soul, and then to higher wisdom. We see here the trying to use this lens of perspective. We actually see Freud here, right? We go through from the carnal desires to the elevation of them, some love of wisdom, intelligence, or cultural activity. Because maybe they are inappropriate or something ethically wrong with those carnal desires, we sublimate them into something else, we transform them into something else. And this is our perception of Diotima, contemporary perception of common perspective on Diotima concept of love. Maybe it's not your perspective, hopefully, but maybe Plato is already queered for you. But we also are able to recognize that this is normal. This is our normal perspective of how we see it in a Freudian way. And this was theorists are trying to argue with this perspective, claiming that it's not Plato problem, and we need to maybe get rid of Freud to some extent, or at least this understanding, the simple reduced understanding of Freud, to see Plato in a correct way. For example, Stella Stanford, the one of your readings is from her book on Plato and Freud. So she claims that it's not it was not Plato who anticipated Freud in his theory, in his ladder of love. But one aspect of Freud theory, that is theory of sexuality, the sublimation of sexual drive, that was just a major theme in a 20th century interpretation of Plato's concept of Eros. It's not that it's not that Plato anticipated, right, some Freudian understanding and started to understand something before about the desire, sexual desire before Plato. But the problem is that we see this Freudian perspective within Plato, because this is the perspective that defined our contemporary way of thinking. This is perspective that Freud articulated, maybe imposed to a certain extent, and this is how we perceive everything now, including Freud, including Plato, because with Plato it's easier, but that it's because it's easier because Plato is talking about bodies and desires and love to our soul. It doesn't mean that it is Plato, maybe just our perspective, right? And also David Harpling, he's researcher on ancient Greece, one of the main researchers. He claimed that just because modern bourgeois Westerns are so obsessed with sexuality, so convinced that it holds the key to hermeneutics of self, so here kind of following Foucault perspective. One ought not therefore to conclude that everyone has always considered sexuality a basic and irreducible element in or central feature of human life. So Harpering being the researcher of ancient Greece culture, philosophy, claims that it's not the Plato problem that we see sexual desire in him as basic, as a bottom point of sublimation to a more appropriate cultural activities or something like that. It's not Plato's problem, it's mostly our problem or Freud problem. But also we have to be careful with Halperin, because he is kind of moralist in this way. He's still, and in this, his morality that he imposes, he kind of preserves the still Freudian understanding, the primitive Freudian, reduced Freudian understanding that this sexual urge is something obscene, and we have to get rid from the perspective that it's central because it's obscene. So it's still the preservation of the Freudian perspective. We see that something is wrong with it. It's not ethical to keep it at the center, and Plato kind of for him was ethical in this way, and he's trying to read Plato as ethical Plato, but very perspective, this moralism that he preserves, kind of preserves in this way Freud as well. And now the magic will happen, I hope. We will try to read again, not the whole thing of Diotima where she presents the ladder of love, but we will try to see the same passage from Symposium, the Diotima ladder that we just read, I read for you, in a different light, by trying to pay attention to different words that Plato also uses. So among all, because of our perspective is so oriented in such a way, maybe not your perspective, but perspective of people of 20th century, and is like oriented in such a way that we tend to see Freud in it, and we tend to see as main words those bold words that you saw. And if you concentrate on those words that were in bold, you actually come up with the ladder of love, the continuum of eroticism that Diotima presents in the way it was presented in the BBC video, in the way it was presented in my ladder of love with Diotima without her head. But there are other words here that if we pay attention to it, and if we see them as central, the new perspective of the continuum of eroticism will open up. So it's a magic. I'm showing you the same passage, but we will see in the same exactly passage the totally different perspective, not only of love, but of like everything. And not only of ancient Greek perspective, but also our perspective. So this is what we're going to change, maybe forever, if we still have it. So those words, new words, are in red. We will concentrate on them, except for those in bold, like love, one body, then all beautiful bodies, then soul, and philosophy, vast open sea of beautiful. So there are also such words as generate, there is word cherish, there is word make the young better, there is word lead, and give birth, right? And this is with our perspective that is oriented towards a perspective of sexuality as central, to sexual desire as central, as according to Foucault, as something, the domain that holds our secrets in the darkness, as a domain that we are questioning to provide the answer for who we are. We keep forgetting that there are other realities, other possible domains that might be seen as central, the perspectives that might be considered as alternative and to define ourselves. And Diotima, so trying to use this perspective, this newly discovered perspective, and concentrate mostly on those words, we can open up the same passage, the same letter, the same words, nothing changed. Plato is dead long time ago, he can't redo it, but already having what we have, already perceived, and the way it's normally perceived, we can switch perspective staying within this exact text. And if you try to do it, you can actually see that in the whole Socrates speech in Symposium, the whole thing of Diotima, you can find the proofs that this is the more appropriate perspective to perceive Plato. For example, Diotima claims that the ultimate meaning of eroticism is procreation, giving birth in beautiful in relation both to body and soul. So we start here, even though Plato first mentions in the passage about ladder of love, first mentions the love to a beautiful body, and then we intuitively recognize it as a Freudian sublimation, that we from one body will go to soul and to wisdom. But we can also, but Diotima actually directly claims that it's about procreation. It's not about desire of individual who is climbing the ladder of love, and it's not about this sublimation. Everything she's presenting, it's about giving of birth in a beautiful relation to both, so procreation and giving of birth. And we can see this point as a central. We can start to see this point as a central. And basically, yeah, let's see the continuum. So this is the not scientific, maybe explanation, but our intuitive explanation of what is continuum of reproduction. Yeah, we know that we get reproduced, and maybe it's naive, not questioning it in any way, but we can claim that the continuum of reproduction of a circle, biological circle, if there is such thing, but there is no such thing as biological, but still it exists in our head, the biological idea of biological dimension, and we perceive it in such a way that first there is desire, then there is intercourse, normally between man and woman, right? We never doubted before recently that it might be intercourse, might be different. Then pregnancy, then giving birth, and then nourishment, taking care of offspring. Yeah, and then the whole thing begins again. So it's the circle of life. This is how we perceive it. And this is maybe to a certain extent how Plato was perceiving it, if he had the dimension that he can share with us of biological things. So the way it's normally perceived is those within our culture, which might be claimed patriarchal for that reason, is that at the center, the main point is a desire, a longing, right? Sexual desire or erotic desire or libidinal drive, something like that. And then this is the desire for the intercourse. That's the Freudian perspective. That's our perspective, well, as well. And those are, right, those are 2 points that when that we tend to see in Plato as central intuitively. Those are 2 points that we see as central in Freud. Well, not only us, I think Freud see them as central as well. And later, a contemporary psychoanalysis and all the doubts, even a feminist perspective, they take them as central, and they project them onto the metaphysical level or on some other level, cultural level that is detached from the biological. For example, if we talk about genders instead, the notion of gender instead of the notion of sex, we still stay on this level. So we take those two points, those 2 starting points, and that question is, why do we even start with them? Because if it's a continuum of reproduction, we can start at any point, right? But we intuitively, within all the procedures, within all the stages that are needed for reproduction. And there is nothing bad with reproduction. I know it's criticized, the idea of reproduction, and sexuality is considered, emancipated sexuality is considered to be detached from the reproduction. Like reduction to biology is bad, but I'm trying to challenge this perspective as well, because it's still the concept of sexuality, it's still is taken from there and just detached from it. I'm not trying to put it back, I'm trying to detach from this basics something else and show the Plato's perspective as he's detaching something else and expanding into metaphysical perspective, not necessarily desire and intercourse or desire for intercourse that we tend to see as central, that we develop within our culture as detached from the biological basis and from this basic physical dimension, and extrapolated on the cultural level, detached from it, emancipated from it. So, and if you think about it, we even start with it here, maybe not you, maybe me, but we start from desire, and this is the desire of intercourse, from those two points as central, as the beginning, as our social convention, right? It might be considered as bias. Why do we start from them? And this might be considered actually the male perspective, because if you claim that the roles are a bit different for female and male in reproduction, this is we still preserving, seeing them as central, we're still preserving the patriarchal male perspective, because those 3, the last 3, pregnancy, birth, and nourishment, are mostly associated with women, right? And if we get rid of them, like sometimes when we're talking about we tend to forget about them. We tend to forget about those 3, last one, even though for reproduction of humans, they're needed in the same way as desire and intercourse, longing and intercourse, but we tend to see them as secondary. But without the pregnancy, without giving birth, and without nourishment, taken care, children need to be fed and taken care of. It's physical care, right? It's not sublimated care. It's as physical as the intercourse. So we kind of getting rid of them, of those 3 that are mostly associated with female. And we will see later in Freud, not today, but next lecture probably, that Freud, he already the one who saw all those three last points as the deviation from initial desire for the intercourse, which is seen as the domain of male power, where the male is active participant and a female is passive participant. So the whole perspective, how we see the reproduction, of human beings, how we see this circle of life, even though we try hard to emancipate sexuality, to see sexuality as or the reproduction as detached from biology, and even doubt biology, that it exists, that it's can be seen through the perspective of some other perspective, that this one we still tend to preserve this basic interpretation. And this is why in Plato, in this passage, because of this initial traditional way of perspective on continuum of reproduction, we see those words as crucial. We define a ladder of love. There is a desire of a man, even though presented by Diotima. We'll talk why is this so? Why is Diotima the one who is presenting it? We see those as crucial, even though we see those words as generation, nourishment, taking care, lead, and birth. Diotima herself claimed that birth is the central, that she's talking about birth, right? We still tend to see other words as crucial, but hopefully this will change. Hopefully this already changed or start to change. So let's try to see, and it's not me, there are people who doing that, seeing pregnant, including Diotima herself, seeing pregnancy and birth as central. Diotima claims that he cherishes beautiful bodies rather than ugly ones because he's pregnant. So we start the first stage where we start when the person who is climbing the ladder of love, he cherishes beautiful bodies because he's pregnant. He's already pregnant, and the whole thing about being pregnant, which is weird because for us pregnancy is the next, if you think logically within our biological perspective, which we're trying to hide when we talk about sexuality. Sexuality is not about reproduction, it is said. Yeah, we see pregnancy as the number 3, right? Or unnecessary, even it shouldn't happen if the sexuality emancipated went in the correct way. So, but here for Diotima, it's all about pregnancies. They are already pregnant, right? When they start, when they have the desire, it's a desire that is the embodiment of pregnancy as such. And those are men, right? For some weird reason, those are men who are pregnant. And if we think about the biological definition of pregnancy that we now traditionally associate with women, you might see, maybe next time I'll show you that it's not, there are some parallel processes and men that we can see the ejaculation, for example, as the, and maybe not analogous to giving birth, but as a part of giving birth, or a process that is the analogy of women holding something inside of her body and then ejaculating it, so giving birth. Those are, maybe they can be perceived as very different stages and processes, but they also might be seen as a process of processes that contribute to each other. So the other quote here, which is helpful and which Halperin is showing us, that Diotima speak as if erotic desire consisted in a excitational brought on by pregnancy and climaxing into the ejaculation of a baby. So everything is weird right now, or at least more weird than it was before. It's all about pregnancy. Where's the sublimation gone from the sexual desire of a body to a desire of a soul? And it turned out it's all about pregnancy. It starts it starts from the pregnancy, and it consists in ejaculation brought on by pregnancy and climaxing and ejaculation of baby. So it starts with excitation, which is excitation of already present pregnancy, and then what they ejaculate is a baby, right? Which is totally weird in within our traditional perspective of this circle of life. And my claim is here. I suggest to see the nourishment as a main point, which is normally seen as not the part of a physical thing, as already something sublimated, not basic, not carnal thing, and unnecessary. But for it is necessary physical presence of someone who is taking care of a baby, of an offspring, for the offspring, especially human offspring, to survive. And you need to feed them. It's same interchange of it's same physical activity, right? As it is as real as sexual intercourse. It is as real as pregnancy itself, and it's also needed for the preservation of life. So we can employ this perspective as well. We can see the whole continuum of including birth that starts at the beginning, before pregnancy and before the desire, and desire is just actualization of it. We can see the whole thing of a ladder as nourishment, at different parts of nourishment. And diatima again provides us some good starting point how we can employ this. He claims, when first discussing animals and how they are different from humans, she claims that and therefore articulating her understanding of what is the natural reproduction in animals. Animals in Plato then precede and are at the basic of animality, at the basic of humans. Maybe something we deviate, but we still preserve this animality. So it's not exclusively about animals, how they are different. Although we might queer this perspective too, that they deviate and sublimate animality that they preserve. Maybe it's still Freud talking in me. But anyway, diatima starts with animal. She claimed that they are in agony when they take the infection of love, which begins with the desire of union. So first there is a desire on the union, but whereto is added the nourishment of offspring. And for her, this addition is not added to it later. Nourishment is not added later to the desire of union, but it's already the nourishment, the desire of nourishment, it's already present within this desire, the agony. Nourishment of offspring, on whose behalf the weakest are ready to battle against the strongest, even to the uttermost, and to die for them, and will let themselves be tormented with hunger or suffer anything in order to maintain their youth. So maybe this translation is not good, but doesn't show it, but we can see this perspective as nourishment is already included in a desire of union. And here diatima shows that it is so powerful, and maybe that's the point to include the death drive, right? To see this death drive, that they are ready to die. So it's so important not to reproduce, because reproduction we perceive as this desire and sexual urge, egoistic sexual urge, but already to take care. And later, diatima to nourish. Diatima presents the two types of humans. She claims that humans still preserve this animalistic desire, which is desire including desire of nourishment, which is the most powerful here. That we can divide humans on two types, that first of them, where they are at a certain age, each human their natural desires to give birth. So this is desire to give birth, right? This is not desire to have sex with someone. For her, it's a desire to give birth. It's already pregnant, and because we are already pregnant, we have the desire to give birth, and this is why we are chasing those boys and some other creatures. There are two types of humans for her. Those on the bottom, they have animalistic Eros. They have desire to give birth to mortal offspring, so normal children, and take care of them, yeah, and die for them, and not nourish them. And the ladder of love represents the transformation of this desire of mortal offspring, giving birth to more and nurturing offspring to the other kind of offspring, which is still seen as the as a children, right? As giving birth to children, something to take care of, something that you're already pregnant of. And this is the elevated Eros. And it is claimed that everyone would choose to have for himself children like this rather than the humankind, right? They are kind of better because they are immortal. And those children, those we are taking care of, those we are given birth to, are also children. So we see here that what Plato projects into the metaphysical level, it's not, it might be seen not as a desire in intercourse or desire for intercourse as a starting basic point and then transformation of it, but still, as we got used to with Freud, that it still preserved this carnal desire of intercourse, and even the most cultural activities are preserved, are actualization of sexual desire. Here what is projected is the whole continuum of reproduction, which we can see through the lens as given birth, taken care, nourishment is a central point. And desire can be interpreted as the desire to procreate, not meaning to use something as an object for sexual satisfaction, but just to procreate, to participate in this. In nourishment and given birth. And this is kind of more coincide with what we understand of love, because it doesn't end in the sexual satisfaction normally. And if it ends in sexual satisfaction, for us, it's not love, right? We don't think about children as well, but some of us don't, at least, but still we participate. Love presupposes care and physical care, right? So if it doesn't presuppose care, we don't call it love. And for other things, to satisfy our sexual desire in biological way, we have masturbation, right? But somehow it's, for the most part, not enough. Maybe it is enough, but we still preserve, maybe not now, during the quarantine, but during our normal course of life, we still preserve the communication with other people. It's not necessary to the intercourse, but we talk to each other, we spend time with each other, and we care about each other. And this is what we see as properly human. So Plato claims, what is this? Oh yeah, the most important thing, that if we consider the sexual desire as egoistic, and normally belong to men, if it's satisfied, right, everything ends because it is satisfied. Of course, for Freud, it's not that easy. We can't satisfy it. It's unsatisfiable as such. But still, intuitively thinking about it, if it's what we want to satisfy, if it's satisfied after the intercourse, it's supposed to end. But and for Plato, within this ladder of love, from this perspective, first the impression is that first we're supposed to use the boy, right, to satisfy our carnal desire. Then we have to sublimate it into love of his soul, and then through this our love and longing, we have to go through to this vast sea of beauty and do different stuff like philosophy. So turn into philosophers. This is the ladder that turn you into a philosopher. But for Plato, there is this last stage, right, where it presupposes not that a philosopher is isolated from other people, and because he's kind of a superior someone now, and the space of philosophy of this superior dimension was open up to him because he did it right. So he doesn't satisfy his egoistic desire, that doesn't transformate his egoistic desire, because love at this point, including love to the boy, to the one who is beloved, remains here, and relationship remains here. So it's still social all the way to the top. He claimed that philosophical lovers are the nurturing of what is begotten, so that men in this condition enjoy a far fuller community with each other than which comes with children, and a far surer friendship, since the children of their union are fairer and more deathless. So those who generate ideas, those who give birth to ideas instead of normal children, and long for ideas to give birth to them because they are pregnant with them, instead of giving birth to children, they still participate in the relationship with other people, right? It's still love, it's still taking care, it's still friendship, and they take care. Here we have the element of taking care of those ideas. They do it mutually, so it's still preservation of this kind of sociality. It's not that, it's not work with a personal desire and the perfection of yourself up to the way then you start to be philosopher. At the end, on the highest point, you still participate in caring relationship with people, and caring relationship with the other metaphysical dimension of idea. That maybe if I have time, I'll show you that for Plato, the whole universe might be seen as a universe of taking care of. The metaphysical dimension nourishes our minds and our souls, and we kind of, what we do, we reflect in our relationship and the circle of reproduction. We reflect this universal kind of care. So in a new way, the ladder of love might be presented, that this wisdom concentrating on such point of reproduction as care, and giving birth, that include giving birth, that includes giving birth, and includes taking care. We can see it as, first it starts, so the phrases that are important here for us, we can see that it starts from the idea that he must love one body and there generate, so the word generate, beautiful speeches, which is about procreation. It's already there, the generation of beautiful speeches of, but within one body. And then the next stage going up, cherish him, so it's about cherishing, right, someone. It's about taking care of him, about the care, and gender, and seek such species as will make the young better. So it's about taking care with words, making better someone, educating someone, taking care as of a child. And literally, now we'll soon see that pederasty was seen as taking care. And the highest level is, with permanent turn to a vast open sea of beautiful, behold it, and give birth in ungrudging philosophy. So again, it's giving birth, which presupposes mutual care of lovers, and of as many people as possible as well participating in this friendship of philosophy, and giving birth, taking care of ideas. And now let's talk about pederasty a bit. Still have time, good. So pederasty, how would you define it? And from the, not the clever definition, not the definition, but just now, the way it functions now. If anyone is there. Yes, Daria.
Probably the idea that sex between men is a kind of higher form of love, and women are used to just to get satisfaction, whether between men it is just this higher form of love, I would say. So yeah, basically just homosexual intercourse.
Thank you. Okay, I see Vladislav and Yami. Who was first?
Maybe that was me.
Okay.
I think that the age plays a role here as well, because pederasty is not only intercourse between male and male, but adult male and young male.
Yeah, true. Thank you. Yami.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I don't think that it can be considered as like homosexuality today, because Vlad just pointed it out, and it was we already heard in former lectures that it was like if you were the older male, you should not, I don't know, you should be the dominant one, and if you, as a man, if you were not the dominant one, you're kind of lost your reputation or whatever. So it must had to always be with a younger boy and not between two adult men, for example.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who raised their hands? Because I don't see the chat. I can only see your videos. Speak up now. Okay, no. Yeah, all of you are correct. And that's important to add that there are different ages. It's not only men, but it's true that we might say that it was seen as superior, but to women from today's perspective, for sure, kind of we see our perspective is perspective of emancipation of women. We see them as repressed, but it was, and therefore perception of pederasty as a superior to women who are kind of stigmatized. But it's contemporary perspective. It wasn't perspective of ancient Greece. It's our reflection. And the age is different. It's supposed to be a boy and a man. And the other observation, well, is also important, that it's the way we define pederasty today. It's not pederasty that was in ancient Greece, and our perspective is this concentrated on sexuality, right? It's kind of perceived today in a common language as the word within the concentration of sexual desire, and this and the sexuality as a course of reproduction as central. Yes, something that defines us as a type of perverted sexual orientation. Yeah, we have, because sexuality is central and sex is central for us in this perspective. We define ourselves through it, right? And it defined as it's a bit deviated now, because we define ourselves, our type of sexuality, on who we like to have sex with, right? Either we are lesbians, either we are heterosexuals, gays, or perverts, because it's like pederasts. But it wasn't so in ancient Greece. And if we see it, and it was different, we don't know how exactly it was perceived within ancient Greek people heads. We can't reproduce it, but at least it's easier to understand it if we employ the perspective of with the taking care at the center, and everything else what is added, including physical intercourse. It wasn't even an intercourse, but physical context. It's something that is good, something that we add to it. And from this perspective, pederasty is actually easier to comprehend. So this is what we already know from Corinne, that it comes from combination word child and the lover. And now, of course, lover within Freudian perspective, lover means the one who has sex, right? Physical intercourse, that's the crucial, that is feature to define the very the very phenomenon. And so, but it totally weird from this perspective that pederastic law affairs were regarded as a most honorable and even the principal cultural model for free relationship between citizenship. Like what? Why is this deviation, right? Why is this total perversion was perceived as okay? They were like tolerating it. It's understandable. Those weird people just tolerated weird stuff. But why it was a cultural model for free relationship, it's like too much, right? There's you get a certain group of perverts from our perspective and they rule the thing and they are the role model. Something went totally wrong. So it's and if we employ the pederastic conception today, pederastic conception, which is defined as sexual activity involving man and boy, right? So we have here age, we have here sex, and we have there the main thing, intercourse, who you have an intercourse with, and I will tell you who you are. Right? So that's the pederasty, but it wasn't so in ancient Greece. If we concentrate more of taking care, we'll kind of comprehend this, the physical element that bothers us the most. We'll see better why was it a part of it. So pederasty. First, the older lover is not just the one who has sex, and he didn't even have the physical penetration, but it doesn't matter. We just I'll try not to discuss it. We got the point. So the function that will define you as the older man, as someone who is taking role in pederasty, is the main feature that he's supposed to educate, protect, love, and provide the love model. This is what defines you, not the intercourse and the physical contact with boys. And plus, in ancient Greece, they did have a definition of rape already. So the intercourse with anyone, woman, thing, boy, might be defined as a rape. And for it not to be defined as rape, but defined as pederasty, there's supposed to be the crucial element here is not intimacy. Well, it is not physical proximity, but the element of protection, education, and providing a role model. And the other thing that is that it might be, according to Harpelin, it is the forerunner of this practice was the male initiation rituals, and we now know it's still preserved with us in the claim that men are not born, they are made, or they are born twice. So, and also, yeah, after boys have been born, Harpelin says, physically from their mothers, reared by women in ancient Greece, they must be born a second time culturally, right? And this is projection. This is mainly projection in a cultural level of the rearing, giving birth of a child, and educating child participation in the relationship of parenthood, right? Transformed into, or transfer skills transformed into a cultural activity. Projection of a parental complex into the cultural educational dimension. So they did same. And Socrates, about himself, we know that he claimed that he's a midwife. He's helping people, men, to give birth, right? So it's the function that they take from a woman, right? And they appropriate it to themselves. We might claim that from the current horny perspective, it's a womb envy, because for Freud, we'll see there is woman is defined, girl's sexual development is defined through penis envy. Like, we really need this thing, and we're really traumatized we don't have it, and this is what we constitutes us as women. Like the basic lack that constitutes woman is deprivation of penis. But here we can see that from the beginning it was more than idea. More appropriate idea here is to compensate, right? The whole cultural activity and the pederasty as well is to compensate for the slack in the participation of the biological participation of rearing a child, nourishing, right, giving birth. And it's also wrong perspective, because it's like women do participate it, men don't participate it, they feel envy and they invent all the kind of weird stuff like giving birth to a man again. And this, it's interesting because this male initiation rituals, the one that precede the practice of pederasty, they really had, Harpelin said, the nose bleeding or some kind of bleeding, which Harpelin claims that it might be imitation of menstruation. But Harpelin, because he is man, he probably doesn't know that when you give birth, you bleed as well. It's not menstruation, it's just maybe postpartum bleeding. So they really reproduce physically all the female processes. And there is also one disturbing maybe element that there was ejaculation of sperm, and which might be not in pederasty. We don't know about pederasty, I don't know at least, but this ejaculation of sperm and kind of feeding the boy, it was also seen not as a weird sexual practice like we see today, but it was seen as a transference of knowledge and as a substitution of breastfeeding, right? And it's not the way we perceive it today, is that those weird old men, perverse, they were kind of hiding what their satisfaction, perverted satisfaction of desire, they were hiding it behind the justifying themselves that it's cultural activity, that they are taking care, but they really want to have intercourse with the boy, and they have to just present it in a beautiful way and compensate by educating the boy. But it's not true, right? If we see that taking care is the first, the crucial parameter, is that the physical element just get something you add to it, right? Something you add to it, even in this weird physical proximity, something you add to it even in this weird way. And we normally see, because of, for us, this patriarchal thing that we start with desire for sexual intercourse, the male perspective, which is preserved in feminism, by the way, in a bit at least. So because of that, we see the ejaculation of sperm and kind of as a substitute, as a kind of sex, right? As a kind of sexual intercourse. But we can also see it as a kind of breastfeeding for real. And those men might be, it's possible that this is what they were associating it with, right? The physical element of taking care of a boy. And the other important perspective is that Athenian fathers would pray that their son would attract the attention of men. So from the perspective that they just wanted their children to have to get in a weird relationship with men, right? To be exploited by men, and that would be real. Why do they want it, right? It's better to protect them. But because they were really seen as extension of parental taking care, including the physical element. But now this time the men kind of play a role in it, and the parents actually wanted them to participate in this kind of relationship. And it was seen as a second stage of parenting, right? The second stage, first it's mother-child relationship, where mother takes care of child, and then there's this relationship, cultural relationship, that is projected to which the biological, more physical care is projected on a cultural sphere. So this captures better the idea of what is pederasty in ancient Greece. So if we see it from the perspective of nourishment, and then try to spread it, the nourishment all over the place, that the nourishment as a central will include the desire, will include the intercourse and pregnancy and giving birth, and even the pederasty seen from this perspective is kind of coincides more with the ancient Greece idea. What were they doing? But the way we perceive now, from the perspective of our today understanding, was the desire for intercourse at the beginning and the end of everything. Like it's enough to be human. And that's Freudian perspective. The Freudian perspective in a way that it's also egoistic, right? For Freud, we will discuss it especially on the lecture where we will talk about love. For Freud, it's still, even though it's desire for sex, and sex is connectivity, right? We are connected when we have a sexual intercourse, but somehow he loses this point. For him, it's satisfaction. In his perspective, still stays a satisfaction of your egoistic desire. You satisfy yourself, you stay the separated individual. Taking care, he talks about taking care, tenderness, but only as a sublimation. It's still you're taking care because you satisfy your egoistic drive. There is not enough connectivity between those people Freud is talking about. In Plato, we can see it in a different way. We can see it as this diatom, a continuum of care. There's the universe taking care of us. And because I don't have time, I'm not going to talk about the Phaedrus dialogue, which is already also seen from the perspective of Freudian perspective of sublimation, with those two horses, if you remember, and a charioteer, the one bad, the one good, and the charioteer, which leads to well, it can also be perceived as the space of care, because in Phaedrus, the whole universe is presented as taken care, and those two horses are a representation of a relationship between people. Both are carnal, but one is when you satisfy the bad horse, is when you satisfy the dark horse, when you satisfy your egoistic desire, when you're having physical lying down next to the boy. And the white one is also presupposes physical proximity, but you you think about the one you love more than yourself. And this is how the whole interconnectivity of universe comes at place. When you care about, when you use the care that you are provided by the universe to care about someone else, and you have the mutual care. So yeah, and something else we didn't discuss is the diatima, why she is a woman, right? If from within the feminist perspective, people normally, theorists claim that it's not a good thing, like it's not her authority that she was invented or invited, if it's the dialogue for real took place and she is the real character, that the words are stolen from her, right, by Plato. So he uses the authority of a woman and gives her words that he wants to. So she is recognized as a woman here, is recognized as authority on those matters of reproduction, giving birth and nourishment. But because she participates, she's invited to, she's not invited, I mean, she's mentioned by Socrates and presented in his interpretation. It's diatima for real. It is claimed that is silence, right? And we know about the role of woman in ancient Greece, and it's also presented as stigmatized and as repressed, which is also, the perspective might be different. I mean, from the point of ancient Greece, of the continuum of care, and what care is better and what care is worse, is lower level, or maybe it is for real the envy of a role of a woman, of her participation in a reproduction circle. Maybe it's a deviation of can be seen as a deviation of initial feminine role, but don't have time to discuss it today. So do you have any questions on this stage?
No, thank you.
Okay, then I will see you tomorrow, and we might discuss the material of a lecture, or you might read at least one of the readings from the reading list. It's also enough just to read. I will send you slides from this lecture, just to read this passage again and try to switch your perspective. I mean, we were doing it all the lecture long. I think we can do it during the seminar as well. It's quite fun. It is for me. It's not for you. I'm sorry.
So
Okay, then,
we are not going to make our presentation tomorrow, right?
You are going to make presentation. I'll check the list of presentation. Just if we have time as well, we can do something else. We can, I mean, if you come up with a question for the lecture, we can discuss them tomorrow, right? Okay, I will see you tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.